Today I'm going to be talking to you about how to use an Excel graph to show student performance data for progress monitoring. This is a tool that can be used when progress monitoring using something like Dibbles, or also for something like a writing CBM or DAYS performance data as well. Let me show you a little bit of what's happening on this graph. This is a graph for oral reading fluency for Dibbles. We can see that performance data was taken for this student one time each week over a 10-week period. Here we can see the student's scores each time the data was taken. And here we see the score for the first time the student was given the data, or their benchmark score. Let me show you a little bit what's happening over here on the graph. The student originally scored 30 on their benchmark score. The team decided that the student should be progressing in oral reading fluency at a rate of 2 words per week. Now that can change depending on your student. Some students may need to increase at an even higher rate, and some students the expectation might be a slower rate than that. So that is usually a team decision to determine the rate the student should make progress. In this case, because the team determined that the student should make 2 words per week of progress, they knew that after 10 weeks, the student should have been increased by 20 words total, or 10 weeks times 2 words per week. If the student started at 30, then their final or target score would be 50. And so this score is put on the last week, or the 10th week. Over here, that creates a target on our graph. And this line here between the 30 and the 50 is called the aim line. It shows the ideal progress for this student. If they're staying on track during the 10 weeks, they will score, this aim line will show the progress that they should be making. If they're below the aim line, then we know that we need to change our instruction to help the student to catch up to the aim line. If they're above the aim line, they might be, they're making so much progress that we probably need to increase the difficulty of the assignment. So some other things that you need to understand about this chart is that here we see the student performance data. Now this student, data was taken each week. But if we're going to analyze a student over a 10-week period and not take data each week, which will probably be happening in your assignment later that you'll be submitting from your 430 class, you still want to put in each week here. Then add your student data on the weeks where you go. The reason that you want to do this is that we're showing progress over a 10-week period. If you take data the first week, then the student score would be expected to be lower than if you take data, say, on the 8th or 9th week. So we want to put our scores in at the appropriate place so we can compare that to the aim line in the appropriate location. If you put your benchmark in 3 visits to the school right here in a line, then you'll have your scores show up here. And that's not an accurate representation of where the student should be performing if it was actually the 7th week or the 9th week that you were taking data. So for your data collection, be sure to put your scores in on the week that you attend. Okay, so one more point that you need to understand about this graph is that we have something here called a trend line. The trend line shows the trend of student performance over a period of time. A trend line can only be established after you have a certain number of data points. Our best bet for a trend line is to have 4 data points at least. In this case, if we have 1 data point, we can't establish the trend. In fact, the student seems to be very close to the aim line after 1 data point. 2 data points really, again, don't give us a trend. But 3 data points start to show us a trend of what's happening with the data. In most cases, after 4 data points, if the student is not progressing on the aim line, we want to make an instructional change. In this case, that would be across one per week. But if we were taking data every 2 weeks, then our data would be spread out farther along this graph. But we'd still want to take probably 4 data points to determine if we need to make an instructional change to make sure we have an accurate trend. In the case of this student, we can see that we probably should have changed the instruction after 4 data points. For example, if this student was in a Tier 2 reading group, and we can see that there's a gap, although it's small, between the trend line and the aim line, it's enough to say that the student's not making sufficient progress to meet their target of 50. So we would probably want to put them in a Tier 3 reading group at this point to see if we could change their performance. That didn't happen for this student, so we can see that now their trend is off the aim line, and here the gap is much more pronounced. At one point, the student catches up to the aim line. This may show that the student really is making good progress, but 1 data point isn't enough to determine that. It could also mean the student was just having a great day, or that the passage wasn't as difficult as some of the other passages had been. So this doesn't tell us that the student is progressing like they need to. Particularly, we see afterwards the student starts to take a downward trend. So for your assignment, you will be creating an Excel graph based on some provided data first, and then based on your data that you're collecting from the schools. Dr. Chan will now explain to you how to make an Excel graph with these different parts.